afternoon, everyone, if you are in New York City or sunny Orlando, Florida, or places south or a little bit west. Good evening to people who might be, let's say, in Berlin or places east. Special love and greetings to our loved ones in Ukraine. We are with you. We support you. And good evening and good morning to people all around the world. It's Friday in most of the world. And this must be Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Idagio, the place where classical music happens. Idagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all around the world. Those of you who have followed my series for now more than 2 years know that when I wear this shirt with flamingos on it, it means that my guest is from Florida. And I have an upcoming guest from Florida in a few weeks, I think, and I'll wear it for her as well. But today's guest is a Florida native. His name is Gabriel Preisser. He was born in Apopka, Florida, and he is a wonderful baritone who is also, at the tender age of 38, the general director of Opera Orlando. And there are not that many people who have been both heads of opera companies and singers, and even fewer who are active in their singing careers at the same time they're running an opera company. So Gabriel, welcome. We have a lot to talk about.
Thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to be with you. Hey, everybody.
So the first thing that I want to ask you about is Apopka and Orlando as a general idea and concept, because I know that everyone has a conception of Orlando, which is partially true. It involves a mouse, but only partially true. It's a much more interesting area than that. My first question for you is, do you know what Apopka means?
If I remember correctly, it's Native American. I can't remember the name of the tribe, so please forgive me. I might be Seminole, and it's big potato.
Well, no, I think they refer to it as the big potato the way I live in the Big Apple in New York. Apopka means the potato eating place.
The potato eating place. Yes, that's right. That's right.
So did you grow up eating potatoes in Apopka?
I mean, maybe someone thought it was Idaho on accident. I don't know. What
Idaho at the other end of the United States, which is a famous potato growing state.
Right, right.
But I mean, the potato was actually original to Peru and South America. There are more than 10,000 varieties, and it spread to the rest of the world. We know exactly when, in the late 1490s, when Christopher Columbus on his sailings went from the Caribbean, which includes Florida, back to Europe and brought the potato with him. It landed in Spain and became papas in Spain, and then got to Ireland and Germany and France and Belgium and Italy. So in Italy, they made gnocchi before with other things, with flour mostly, but then they became potato gnocchi. And in France, pomme frite, fried potatoes, potatoes Anna. In Germany, Kartoffeln. In Ireland, potatoes every way. In England, chips. So imagine Europe and your world cuisine without potatoes. It's just almost inconceivable, but they are from South America, and still the best place for eating wonderful potatoes of all types happens to be Peru. And but I just was wondering how the potato reached the Native Americans, probably something through Columbus, because Florida is part of the Caribbean, as we well know.
Right.
It is part of the United States, but it's like America's sandbox stuck down there, and it's its own entity, and it's very diverse. It has huge coastlines on the Atlantic Ocean, on the Gulf of Mexico, but also it's an incredibly agricultural state. It's one of the most important agricultural states in America. And I didn't really know about the potatoes, but I knew obviously about citrus, and that's what we want to get to, that Orlando is in Orange County. And the first time I was there, the very first trip I made as a little kid, I flew on my own, was at the age of 5 in 1961. And
Oh
I
my
had
gosh.
family in Winter Park, which then was quite distant from the town of Orlando. Now
Yeah.
it's part of the metro area. And I came to visit them in Winter Park. And I remember the smell of oranges and of grapefruits. I remember it everywhere. That the air was just rich and fragrant with citrus. So ever since, I buy oranges that I have shipped from Orange County, and I am
Do
eating
you
one
really?
today.
Oh my gosh.
Because I love them.
Well,
So,
are you a big fan of orange juice, Fred?
well, I was until I discovered that if you eat enough orange juice, I'm not a diabetic, but one could become a diabetic because of the amount of sugar. So I don't drink juice. I only eat fruit.
Well,
Oranges.
I'll just put this out there because it's a popular brand now, Simply Orange. I don't know if they have it outside of the United States, but in the US, it's become a very popular brand. And it is from Apopka, Florida.
Really?
So if you think
I've
you don't know
seen it.
Apopka, Florida, you maybe you do.
Potato flavored orange juice. I've seen
Right.
it, but really, I'm very serious about this. You know that I write cookbooks and I know about food. Fruit juices, I love them for their flavor, but they're so high in sugar that I don't
absolutely.
drink. I don't drink fruit juices, but I do eat fruit. Anyway, the reason I mentioned the smell of oranges and grapefruits in the air and my visual memory of groves everywhere was that in 1961, there was no such thing as Disney World and theme parks. And Orlando was a small city in the center of Florida, not along the coasts. There were many lakes around Orlando and still are. And at that time, the nature was spectacular. And I remember as a 5-year-old going canoeing with my cousin, and we went into a creek, which is sort of, how would you define a creek? A little tree-shrouded, moss-shrouded grove. And there was a shack there, and we caught fish, and we ate fried fish and ate something called hush puppies. It was completely rural and beautiful, and it was like Nature Boy is what it was. And that is my first memory of Winter Park in the surrounding Orlando area.
And there are parts that are still like that, Fred. It's definitely still like that in many ways. Yeah.
I know that. Very beautiful. And I'm eating my orange to get in the mood. And I mention that because people go to Orlando almost always either for Disney or Universal,
right,
or all the more than a dozen theme parks that are in the area. And the place has entirely changed because it's a massive urban area now with millions of people.
Yeah.
And a very fine airport. I only have one objection to the airport, but a very fine airport. Excuse me, I won't eat any more orange. But you get there, if you rent a car, then you get a car and you go to the theme parks, and people don't actually experience Orlando.
Right.
Orlando has the University of Central Florida, where I've lectured on opera. It's a wonderful, very large university. There's Rollins College in Winter Park. There is, I don't know if you ever saw a film, Gabriel, and I recommend it to anyone, called The Florida Project. Did you ever see that film?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did see that.
So talk about that film, and I'll eat a piece of orange. It's a very interesting film. To me, it was one of the great films I've seen recently. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and before we get into the film, I heard a statistic that I think goes along with what you're saying, that in Orange County, there's 1,000 people a week are moving here.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy. I mean, part of that is still coming out of the pandemic, but there's a lot to do down here. No state income tax, which is a big deal. Obviously close to the beaches on either side. And now we got the art scene picking up. But yeah, the Florida Project, gosh, it's been a while since I saw it, Fred. So you're putting me on the spot.
Well, I'll talk about it. It was
the
Florida Project was the official and secret name that Walt Disney gave to the construction of Disney World.
That's right.
What the film is about the fact that real people also live in the Orlando area, and not only entertainers and people dressed as a mouse and a dog and everything related to Disney.
Right.
Harry Potter, the Universal Studios, which has a different flavor, and I like it as well too. But it's
Yeah.
a very different flavor from Disney, both of which are great. And there's Epcot at Disney, and there are many, many other theme parks as well. But who works in and who lives in Orlando and supports this, and nonetheless sometimes doesn't always benefit from it? So the Florida Project was a beautiful film about a family that lived in a motel. They were homeless in the shadow of Disney World, but it was there like the Magic Kingdom that they couldn't get into because they were just local people. And I say this because when I talk to Europeans about Orlando, they say, yeah, we're going to go to Orlando and go to Disney World. And I always say, well, you know what? They have beautiful cuisine, fantastic agriculture. They have an opera company. They have a symphony orchestra. They have art museums. They have universities. They have all these things that a city with cultural attractions would offer. And yet they only think to go to the theme parks, and maybe a day at the Kennedy Space Center, which I love too, so I would do that. And maybe a day either on the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. I certainly understand that. But I mention this too because you run an opera company that is in the middle of a city that people come to for entertainment.
Right.
But they don't necessarily come to Orlando to go to the opera.
Yeah.
And that's something I want to talk to you about. How do you develop not just the local audience, who are, you know, in some cases, the people in the Florida Project? Not only there are doctors and teachers, and there's everything every community has, but how do you make yourself known to the people who come from around the world? There are flights from Reykjavik to Orlando. Everything lands in Orlando, even not necessarily Miami. But Orlando Airport receives flights from everywhere, from Germany, everywhere.
Right.
How do you make the Opera Orlando known to people elsewhere?
Well, I think
we're doing that today, of course, but
I think there are two parts to that, and one is creating a unique identity as an opera company, just in general. You know, how do you set yourself apart? And we've tried to do that with our productions. You know, we do traditional repertoire, but if there's a chance to reimagine it or update it in some way that enhances the storytelling or connects with our local audience, we always look for that. For instance, we did Carmen last season, but we set it in Haiti. Many people might not know, but there are several Haitian Americans that live in the Central Florida area. And Creole, which is the native tongue of Haiti, is the third most common language in Orange County. And so it's a great opportunity for us to partner with the Haitian American Chamber of Commerce, get those folks to come to the opera for the first time. We did the dialogue version of Carmen, and the dialogue, we had it in Creole. We had a Creole specialist fly in from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, worked with the cast. You can imagine the opera singers were a little intimidated at first to have to take that on, but they really jumped in. And it's so similar to French. They did a beautiful job. And then obviously the sung part of Carmen was all in French, which is so similar to Creole. So it really sounded very nice. And it was evocative to set it in Haiti. It really worked well with the story of Carmen. So we've tried to set ourselves apart as a company, create an identity. We just did a world premiere of a new piece called The Secret River, which is about an African-American family. It was a story, a children's book, written by Marjorie Canaan Rawlings, who grew up in Central Florida. And she wrote this children's book that was not published during her lifetime, so many people didn't know about it. But it's a sweet story of an African-American family during the Great Depression, trying to make ends meet, and their daughter finds a secret river, is able to save their family. And so we were able to do an opera that was Florida-centric, but also family-friendly. Our youth company sang in it. So, you know, finding productions that maybe have a different take on them, also productions that really speak to our audience is what we try and do. The other side of how do we take advantage of Orlando becoming an international city, we have a great partnership with Visit Orlando, and they do several conferences, conventions. They're kind of the main marketing arm of Central Florida. And it was funny, when I was visiting Las Vegas, I saw an ad for Visit Orlando. It's like, oh gosh, they really are all over the place. But so when they have conventions, say it's a doctor's convention or conference, there's a big conference center in Orlando, and like you're saying, people flying from all over, we're able to market at those conventions. And yeah, people sometimes come here just for the parks, but usually if you're coming for a convention, you want to experience something different. Maybe you've already done Disney. So we've had several of our audience members who are here on a convention and they're from Brazil or they're from the UK. And they're like, we've already done the parks. We want to experience something different. And I tell you, Fred, now that we have our new performance space, Steinmetz Hall at Dr. Phillips Center, a real acoustic hall, 1,500 seats, and it's a world-class venue.
I was going to ask you about that hall, so go ahead. And do you know who Dr. Phillips was?
Orange Grove,
Yes.
Scientist, but then he just kind of owned all this property here, right. Real estate tycoon, Orange Grove extraordinaire guy. Yeah.
I heard of Dr. Phillips way back on my first visit as being so influential in terms of the growth and the protection of the citrus industry in Central Florida, which was at that time the biggest industry and is still important.
Yeah, yeah. But all the property that he had is not necessarily orange groves anymore, but now it's developments. Right. And they have created a Dr. Phillips Charities, the Dr. Phillips Foundation. They're big supporters of the arts. Thank goodness that his wife, Della Phillips, was a lover of opera. So yeah, huge thanks to them. They helped build the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center, which is our main home. And there are 3 venues in that building. The last one that was just finished was the acoustic space, which is really where we are going to be doing all of our productions moving forward. We have a 3-show main stage series that will all be in Steinmetz Hall next season. So yeah, come visit us from all around the world. There's flights to Orlando from anywhere. You can come for the theme parks, but stay for the opera, right?
But here's my question. You mentioned Las Vegas, and I was going to mention Las Vegas. And the reason is I, a number of years ago, had a consultancy out there in which they were trying to develop more of a presence for the classical performing arts. They now have a wonderful center there, the Smith Center.
Yeah,
but even
I
before
visited that while I was out there. It is gorgeous. Yeah.
Yep. It was built by someone named Paul Beard, who's a friend of mine who built the Kravis Center in West Palm Beach, and then Bass Hall in Fort Worth, which is a masterpiece. And so Paul is a very, very talented envisioner, if that's a word, of theatrical spaces. Anyway, but even before Paul was in Las Vegas, I was out there and spoke to people about the combining of what we know to be very good in Las Vegas, which is to say, not just the shows, but also the technical capacity for the shows.
Right, right.
So that, there's something called O, which is about water. And I spoke to them about building a space where the technology could, perhaps you could do Otello or the Flying Dutchman or something that requires water. They create these special spaces for opera in their settings.
Yeah.
And that will eventually come to pass. And it occurred to me, Gabriel, that no other place in America, apart from Las Vegas and Orlando, can really do that. Not New York, not Los Angeles. And Orlando, because you have Disney, Universal, and so on that have these magnificent technical capacities. To me, it kind of seems a natural that you do eventually a project. So, and what I would frankly start with would be either Rossini's Cenerentola or Massenet's Cendrillon, something relating to Cinderella, where you have these settings. And I know that Disney goes by its own rules. I'm not criticizing them for that because Disney's publishing arm published my Opera 101 book, so no complaints. But it would be a long-term project, but it would be a very interesting project because then that would bring attention to the Orlando Opera. I keep saying Orlando Opera. I mean Opera Orlando.
That's okay. Yeah.
And in a way, we'll explain why in a moment, in a way that really will raise your company's profile, but also do something very valid, something that frankly Disney can't do by itself or Universal can't do by itself, because you bring elements that they can't provide.
Well, I'm happy that you brought that up. It's been on our radar from the beginning, and we do have something in the works. I'm not able to announce it. We were very fortunate to get a board member, one of our board members involved, who is a VP at Universal. And we started off in a very simple way, and we said, hey, we do one production a season that's site specific at Opera Orlando. Like we did Girl to Golden West at a Cheyenne Saloon, which is an actual saloon in downtown Orlando. People ate it up. You know, it's a cowboy opera, and they didn't know if the bartender was a real bartender or if he was just in the show. He was actually in the show. But so we did a site-specific production on Universal property that this board member was able to help us with. It was at the Lowe's Portofino Hotel. I got to make sure I say the right name, which is Italian themed, right? So we did Verdi's King for a Day in their wedding, their Venetian ballroom. You know, it's all about a wedding day gone wrong, and they do actual weddings there all the time. And people ate it up. They just loved it, loved being on Universal property. So that was kind of the start of our partnership with Universal. And we have a bigger project in the works. I can't talk about it, unfortunately, but you're exactly right. That's a way to leverage the resources that we have and do something unique that's a win-win for, I think, both the theme parks and for us, especially. My gosh.
And also, frankly, becomes, when people sign up, let's say in Germany, because I know so many flights go from Frankfurt to Orlando, that they can sign up for a theme park visit, a beach visit, and a night at the opera in one of these settings that you're talking about. That too becomes an attraction. I for other companies who created these packages where it's a combination of beach tourism and unexpectedly wonderful performing arts. So it's something that you can think about. You were talking about repertory, and I just thought of something while I was eating my orange. I'm named for three people named Frederick, and one of them is Frederick Delius, the composer. And Frederick Delius wrote several operas, including A Village Romeo and Juliet. And Frederick Delius was British, although I believe his origin was either Norwegian or Swedish. And his family bought land in Central Florida, closer to the coast than where you are. And he came to Florida and ran their orange plantation and sent oranges back to Great Britain from Florida in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He wrote something called the Florida Suite, which is a very beautiful piece of music. And there is a natural linkage, not because of Frederick, but because of Delius, between the orange industry, their family presence, his Florida Suite, which is really gorgeous, and the fact that he wrote very beautiful operas that are accessible operas in English. And I would recommend A Village Romeo and Juliet, but you can look at any of the ones that you want.
I was not familiar with any of that, so I'm going to look into it.
So that's why I'm tossing it out to you. So
I hear the Florida Suite is very sweet.
But no added sugar.
No added sugar, right?
But but the thing is, there are many things that your company can do that, you know, it takes time in doing. How long have you been in your job?
We just finished our 6th season. I've been with the company from the beginning. Since we started Opera Orlando in 2016.
Right. So explain that, because I accidentally said Orlando Opera, which was 1958 to 2009. That was a different entity.
Yeah.
You want to explain the difference?
A little history there. So the Orlando Opera Company grew out of the junior league ladies who started having opera concerts. They even had Pavarotti come at one point and sing here in Orlando, Placido Domingo, Beverly Sills, Cheryl Milnes was kind of a regular here. And it was a very prominent company. And by the time it got to the 90s, early 2000s, and they performed at the Bob Carr Municipal Auditorium. There was no Dr. Phillips Center at that time. Unfortunately, around 2008, when the recession was happening, you know, Florida got hit pretty hard, especially Central Florida. The real estate market was kind of a mess. And the opera company mismanaged its finances, to be honest with you, Fred, and unfortunately had to close their doors. They did file for bankruptcy. So that nonprofit organization tax ID number went away. In the meantime, the Orlando Philharmonic, who now plays for our productions, great organization, they started doing semi-staged operas to kind of keep opera alive in Orlando, because there was an audience for it. You know, people grew up with the
They
opera.
did La Boheme and Porgy and Bess, and I saw them.
Yeah, they did
Yep.
good productions. They really did. I sang in a couple of them when I moved back home. I moved back home in 2012, and so started singing with the Phil here locally. And then there was also a group of like diehard opera fans who had started their own little company, very small, called Florida Opera Theater, and I sang in some of their productions. They were doing concerts in their homes. They even did Johnny Skiki in somebody's house, which was really cool.
Did they have a dead person in somebody's house?
Not a real dead person, luckily, just a dummy. Yeah.
Okay, no, because I've played that role. It's my best operatic role, actually.
Were you Buoso? You were Buoso? Yeah.
Povero Buoso.
It's hard. Povero, poverino. So I got involved singing with both the Philharmonic and Florida Opera Theater, and just started to notice that really we needed one voice for opera. And you know, as much as Orlando is a big city, it's still a small community, especially in the arts. It's still a small community. Mm-hmm. So I kind of threw out the idea of, hey, why don't we make Florida Opera Theater a real professional company? You guys should hire staff. And they invited me to be on the board. That was their mistake. They should have never done that. And I said, we should change the name, get Orlando back in the name. Why can't we just call it Opera Orlando? That way it's not the same name as the Orlando Opera Company. And the board president at the time said, well, Gabe, why don't you just do it? And being a foolish baritone as I am, Fred, I said, sure. Not knowing what I was getting myself into. And we rebranded Florida Opera Theater into Opera Orlando. We partnered with the Phil. They agreed to stop doing semi-staged operas, and now we hire them to play for our productions. So it all worked out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here we are 6 years later.
I know that you went to Florida State University, which is in the northwest part of the state in Tallahassee. I've taught there, but not in music in the Italian department. I've taught. And you were a major in vocal performance, but a minor in business. Why did you do that? Were you already thinking ahead, or why did you pick a business minor?
I wasn't thinking ahead in terms of running my own company. It was more, I did a lot of AP classes in high school, and I was getting
What's
a
AP?
bright,
Define AP.
They're called advanced placement classes. Mm-hmm. So it's like you do college courses, but at the high school level.
In other words, for smart kids.
Yeah, I guess so.
Kids, you can say it. Okay.
I guess so. So I had a lot of college credits going in, but you know, if you're in the opera program, you have to be there for 4 years. So I was going to have a lot of downtime. I said, well, I should probably get a second degree. So I actually got a second degree in commercial music, because I was interested in just like having something to fall back on. I was interested in writing my own songs, maybe like film score, maybe being in the studio doing recording. And as part of commercial music, you had to get a business minor. So that was just kind of by happenstance. I'm really happy I did, because I had at least somewhat of an understanding of micro and macroeconomics and budgets, income versus expense, just some basics. And, you know, one of my teachers was Stanford Olson at Florida State. I'll never forget. He said this to me.
Wonderful guy.
Fabulous tenor. Oh my gosh, Rossini tenor. He said, you know, Gabe, as a singer, you're your own business. And I'm so happy he told me that, because I feel like several singers don't learn that lesson early on. And so he's like, you need a 5-year strategic plan for your own business, a 10-year plan. You know, what are your goals? Not just that you want to sing at the Met, but like financial goals, right? And how are you going to get there? So I really kind of took all that to heart. But no, I was never on my radar to run a company. This just kind of happened. And it's been a wonderful thing. I got to give a lot of kudos, a lot of credit to the board for being supportive. Because when we started, they said, we still want you to perform, Gabe. You know, and I was singing in shows, and, you know, the donors like it when I sing in the shows, but they've been very supportive that I still get out there, still perform, because it is a unique thing to do both, as
Yes.
you mentioned, Fred. Yeah.
Well, I made myself a little list. There was Mary Garden, the famous soprano in Chicago in the 1920s and 30s, and she was a huge star. This was before the Lyric Opera of Chicago, which only came in 1954. But Chicago has a wonderful opera house, but they never managed to keep an opera company going. There are all these failures. And
Really?
the Chicago Opera Company in the 1920s, though they had huge stars, was not well managed financially. And Mary Garden would sing a lot and, raise money when she sang. It just didn't work. And then when the Depression came in 1929, that was it. Edward Johnson was a tenor. He was a Canadian tenor. And in 1935, when Giulio Gatti-Casazza, the very famous Met general manager who brought in Toscanini and Caruso and Puccini and all that, when he retired and went back to Italy, they hired a local tenor. He was Canadian, but lived in New York, Edward Johnson, who ran the Met from 1935 in the middle of the Depression. And
Oh,
the
wow.
founding of that year, the Metropolitan Opera Guild and Opera News Magazine, all happened then through World War II until 1950, when he retired and was replaced by Rudolph Bing, who was there from 1950 to 1972. Mr. Bing was not a singer.
Yeah.
The next one I knew personally and worked with, Beverly Sills. Beverly Sills was at the New York City Opera. She began in the 1950s. By the 1960s, was a huge star worldwide, except at the Met, which did not engage her, unfortunately, for a while. But she and Julius Rudel, the great conductor, basically ran the company together. And then when he left, she ran the New York City Opera in the late 70s, early 80s. She eventually stopped singing to devote her time to running the company. But at a certain point, her voice just was, I think she knew, stopped singing. She was only about 51.
Yeah.
And she was the best fundraiser I've ever met. And she knew the stock market well, and she was able to invest the company's funds. But that said, without her, the company struggled. People gave money because of her. And when she then moved on to other endeavors and then retired, and I remember I said to her, "What are you going to do when you retire?" She said, "Well, I'm just going to lay back and stop and smell the roses." And then about 6 months later, we were talking. She said, "You know what? I've discovered I'm allergic to roses." And so she got back in and she went to work at the Met and at Lincoln Center. And she, was a phenomenal fundraiser. But that's different from running an opera company and knowing voices. And a couple of years ago on this program, I had Carol Vaness, who was the leading soprano who stepped into the Beverly Sills roles once Beverly no longer did them. And Carol and I spoke about doing productions created for Beverly. I had Samuel Ramey recently, who spoke about doing productions created for Norman Traeger. So there was Beverly Sills, very famously. In a way, the most successful one, although Edward Johnson was quite successful, was Brigitte Fassbinder, the German mezzo-soprano, who had a wonderful career.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Well, as a singer,
I'll tell you about it. She was a fantastic singer, one of the greats.
Yeah.
I was thinking yesterday about her Octavian. She was a brilliant artist in the German tradition. And when she began winding down her career, she ran the Tyrolean State Theater, which includes the opera, in Innsbruck in Austria. And she lives near Munich. And she did a fantastic job there. Now, yes, Austria has wonderful arts funding. They have a great theater in Innsbruck. They're close to both Munich and to Italy and Switzerland. So people would come there and have a good meal and go to the opera. And Brigitte Fassbinder was already by then a very established legendary star. And just her name plus the geography meant that people would come. But she programmed with very good taste. And she continued to teach singers she thought had talent, such as the Irish mezzo Tara Erot, who went to that area to study specifically with Brigitte Fassbinder and wound up being part of the company in Munich for a long time. After Fassbinder did this, she did this 1999 to 2012, so a good run. She now heads the Richard Strauss Festival in Garmisch-Partenkirchen in southern Germany. And so even well into her 80s, I believe she's well into her 80s or into her 80s, she's still very active as an arts administrator and does a really good job. So frankly, although the conditions were really different between Innsbruck and Orlando for all the obvious reasons, be in touch with her. I think she can
Yeah.
give you a lot of very good advice because she's very smart and a wonderful teacher and knows budgets and knows all of that. She was not as famous as an administrator as Beverly Sills, but I think on balance, she left a stronger legacy in her company than sadly the New York City Opera, which eventually folded not because of Beverly, but mismanagement that came after when they didn't have the golden touch of fundraising that Beverly Sills had.
Yeah.
Sometimes an opera company or an arts institution becomes so identified with the individual, Mary Garden in Chicago, that when that individual steps away, it's hard for the company to continue.
Right.
And
that is a tricky dynamic that exists. Yeah.
So
I do have a brother,
so
I mean that helps. If I go away, I'll just keep my brother around, right? Can I do that?
Well, you have a brother. What does your brother do at Orlando? I know that, but I want you to tell me what Grant Preisser does.
I have several brothers. There were 6 of us growing up, and Grant is my older brother. He was actually the first one in our family to get into the arts, like in high school. We were a big sports family. My dad was a football coach, and Grant was one that was like, I want to do theater, like I want to sing in the musical. And my parents were luckily very supportive of that. So I would go see him in shows like that. That's kind of cool. And that's why I started doing musicals in high school, and then eventually auditioned for the opera program at Florida State. But I tease people. I say Grant's the real talent in the family. He is in many ways because he is a graphic designer, set designer, went to school and got a master's degree in interior design and architecture. He's a stage director, just can see things and knows how to execute them. I'm more just the pretty face and the fundraiser. I wouldn't say I'm a Beverly Sills, but I'm the party guy.
So you're kind of like the Venus and Serena Williams of the Florida opera scene.
Sure. I'll take that. Of course, I do bust his chops because he is older than me, and I am his boss theoretically. But we love working together. I mean, how fun to get to work with someone in your family. And if I didn't work with Grant, I feel like we would never talk to each other because he is such a workaholic. So whenever he gets engrossed in whatever he's doing, and he has helped us from day one. When we got started in 2016, he was just kind of doing graphic design for me as a favor. And eventually we got him more and more involved, and he became our artistic director, I guess 2 years ago. My title was executive and artistic director. Then we changed my title to general director. I report to the board, and then Grant is our artistic director. And we have a blast.
Did any of the other brothers go into the arts?
No, we do very different things. My oldest brother was in finance and now does like financial wealth management, financial planning for folks. Second brother is an Air Force pilot who is now in the Air Force Reserve and flies for Delta. Third brother is Grant, who I told you about. And then fourth brother is Garrett. They're all G names. We're all G names. Sorry about that. Garrett is a fundraiser at University of Central Florida, which you mentioned, right there in Orlando. And then my sister, the one girl in the family, Gretchen, she has 7 kids of her own. She's a full-time mom.
Wow. So I'm working on something here you're going to have to help me with about being in the key of G.
Well,
G
my
major.
parents were Geraldine and Gary. So it started with them. We're all in the key of G. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's an article or a presentation to be done on that, especially with the fundraiser and the Delta Airlines pilot. There's something here, believe me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk now about you, the baritone, because as I said, it is almost unique. You and Mary Gardner are the only two I can think of people in an active career who are also running a company. Beverly Sills sang, but she was really winding it down, and she knew she was, whereas you're 38 years old. So
I'm just a baby, Fred. It's a baby.
but how does it work? I know you have the answer to this in terms of how you and your company and the board know when you have your administrative cap on and you're running the opera there, and when you are in Philadelphia or Cincinnati or Las Vegas, wherever you might be, performing.
Well, luckily, with Zoom calls like the one we're on right now and the beauty of technology, it's not like, oh gosh, Gabe's going to be gone for 3 weeks doing a gig in Las Vegas. We need to find someone to replace him. I'm still able to lead the meetings virtually, call donors. And in many ways, I meet new donors when I'm on the road and sometimes get them to be involved with Opera Orlando or come see our shows. So I think the board saw the benefit of me being an ambassador as I'm performing at other opera companies. I get to meet other singers. So we don't hold auditions in New York. And I know that might be like, oh my gosh, how do you not hold auditions? Everyone holds auditions. Well, it's expensive. And also I meet a lot of singers out on the road, so I'm able to be like, oh, well, this person would be great for our next production of Bohème that we're mapping out 2 or 3 years. We do hold auditions in Orlando, just FYI, in case anybody wants to come sing for us. But again, I think the board saw the benefits there. And then the other kind of negotiating element with that was we just had to be clear that if it's a production week, I have to be in Orlando, or if it's our big fundraiser or any of our fundraisers, I have to be in Orlando. So I say no to gigs, and that's okay. I can be a little more choosy about what offers come my way through my manager. And sometimes my manager's a little frustrated that I say no to things. But I got to tell you, it's also a good thing for my family. We have 2 little ones, so I'm home more than I used to be, Fred, and that's a really nice thing.
Have you and the board established any kind of guidelines about whether you will sing at your company at Opera Orlando or whether you'll separate those 2 jobs? How does that work?
Yeah. No, we were very transparent about that. And we talked about whether we wanted to write it into the contract, and we decided not to, just have some flexibility. But kind of the expectation is that I will be in at least 1 show per season. And that's mostly because the donors like that, right? Okay. And we get donations because I am singing in the show. So we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose that opportunity. And, any chance that I get to do like an outreach concert, I perform, because I'm working for the company. I don't get paid extra. I did make that stipulation that, hey, it's just all included in my contract, that whatever you need me to sing, if you want me to sing at the gala, if it makes sense for me to sing at the gala, I'll do that. If we're doing an expo booth at the Chamber of Commerce, I'll sing at that too, whatever the company needs. And that's kind of been the spirit from the get-go. And I do love to sing. So come on.
Yeah, no, I know. But because I think that they would want to hear you locally. You are a native. You're from the potato eating town. You're the orange eating
town. Right. I'm an Apopkan. But I think that's why it's been so successful, because I am local. I grew up here, and the community's really responded well to the fact that it's like, oh, you came back to Orlando and you're trying to get this your hometown company going again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I asked my guests in most cases to dip into the Adagio catalog and find music or performers that they particularly like or inspired by. And I can say that while you have Johann Strauss and Rossini and a lot of Verdi, I don't think it was the composers in your case. I think it's the 2 baritones you selected. There is the American baritone Leonard Warren, who was a huge star, often considered the best baritone in the world of the 1950s, although I never say best, but I read a lot up about him, who famously died on stage at the Met during a performance in 1960 of La Forza del Destino, which was also Renata Tebaldi's first performance at the Met that season. And it is a very, very famous event. And true story, there was a critic who attended the performance but left early, and he wrote his review. It was in an Italian language paper in the New York area. that said in effect that Leonard Warren has never been better. And the review came out. This was before internet, so the review was printed, and then the news came that he died. So the critic was fired because he had reviewed something he obviously was not there to cover.
Wow.
Whereas another newspaper in New York won the Pulitzer Prize for coverage of that event. The other baritone is the German baritone, Berlin-born Herman Fry. So let's start with Leonard Warren. Why Leonard Warren? What is it that you picked in him as a baritone?
Well, aside from, I do agree. I think he might have been the best Verdi baritone. Let me put it that way. To ever sing the repertoire. He sang with such a joie de vivre. I mean, just the way he sang, he was always just joyous, you know. I remember watching, I know it's on YouTube, the video of him doing Largo al Factotum, which probably wasn't necessarily his repertoire. I mean, he was probably a young man doing
That's
it.
Rossini's Barber of Seville in Italian.
Exactly. And just the zest that he gave that, the life he gave that. You know, there's like a figure in there where it's per un barbiere di qualità, and then he did ha 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 ha, and like intuned it on the nose. I was like, oh, that's genius. I'm gonna steal that. I never stole it, but because you couldn't do it the same as Leonard Warren. But he was just one of a kind. I think as a young singer, we're all kind of attracted to, oh, what a big booming voice, and he had that, but it wasn't forced. It just was his natural instrument. I had a huge noggin. I mean, just this massive resonating chamber. And I don't know. I was just always impressed with him, not just as a singer, but as a performer.
Can we really tell on a recording from the 1950s what his voice sounded like? Because Birgit Nilsson, who had a huge voice, recorded in that time and into the 60s. But I never felt that recording did justice to the sensation of what her voice sounded like live, which I got to hear.
Yeah. I never got to hear him live, of course. So yeah.
Nor did I.
I think you could get a sense though of the vivacity and the life in his voice, and that really drew me in. Yeah.
And the other baritone you picked did not have a big booming voice. We could say his voice was not as beautiful and as charismatic as Leonard Warren, but Herman Fry, why did you pick him?
Well, one of my teachers, Dr. Gerald Pope, may he rest in peace, no longer with us, fabulous teacher. He turned me on to Herman Fry originally. And I was kind of like you. I was kind of like, I don't really get it. You know, I mean, he was great on Art Song.
I get musical. It. I get Herman Fry.
Yeah. But it took me a while for me to get it, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, his Art Songs is very musical. And then later on, I had another teacher, Braden Harris, husband of Brenda Harris, fabulous soprano. And he's like, you know, your voice actually reminds me a lot of Herman Fry. I was like, I should go back and listen, because he was kind of this high lyric baritone. You know, did a lot of Eisensteins, a lot of kind of Zwischen. Yeah, in Deflator Mouse. Did a lot of Zwischen reps, Zwischen meaning like in between baritone and tenor. And I was starting to look at that repertoire myself. Like I was looking at Le Marie and Poulenc's Les Mamelles de Thérésias, which could be a tenor role, could be a baritone role. And I was doing Danilo and The Merry Widow. So I started to feel some similarities. And so, you know, as a singer, you're always looking for role models that you can empathize with vocally. And I started to really empathize with him. And the more I listened to him, I was like, wow, you know, what he's able to do, the subtlety, the dynamics, the control, especially in that upper passaggio, like around F sharp. I was like, this guy really was a master. And, you know, you go back and listen to his Mahler recordings, even that Lies of Flea and the Schubert Ständchen, the Serenade by Schubert. It's just stunning.
And his Brahms German Requiem.
Oh, yeah.
Astonishing. Yeah.
So I just fell in love with him. And I got to find some video recordings of him doing Figaro in Barber Seville, doing the Largo and doing Papageno. And he was one of the ones
you you picked him doing it in German. Ich bin das Faktotum der schönen Welt.
Which was so cool, right?
In Italian, I'm the factotum of the città, of the city. In German, it gets inflated of the whole world.
Yeah.
But it is so very funny. I want listeners to go and listen to Herman Fry. We have the link on the page.
Yeah.
Herman Fry singing Figaro's aria auf Deutsch, although he did it wonderfully with Claudio Abbado in Italian. With Teresa
he could do it either.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that recording. I think isn't Fritz Wunderlich the Alma Viva? It's all in German.
They often perform together. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in my youth, which is to say younger than you are now, I mean, my genuine teenagehood and so on, I knew Herman Fry, and actually quite well.
Oh, wow.
Because my family works in the music business and was in and around Lincoln Center. And he was a frequent guest in our house. And when I was an 11 and 12-year-old, and at that time, my voice was just changing. And it's not that I was thinking of becoming a singer, but we have in New York something called the High School of Music and Art. Now it's the LaGuardia School for the Performing Arts. And I decided to audition. And Herman Fry taught me the first Papageno aria from Mozart's Magic Flute.
Really?
So when I went in, and I was accepted with my slightly breaking voice, because I was not yet a baritone, I became one. It was under the tutelage of Herman Fry in pretty good German when no other kid showed up and sang anything in the original language. And so I have him to thank in a way for showing me that it was possible, although ultimately I went into management and production, but that it was possible to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And he turned me on to the fun aspect of singing, the seriousness, of course. But another thing I can tell you, because I remember it so well, is that he was a wonderful artist, but he was always considered sort of the number 2 German baritone to Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, who was held up as the paragon and the gold standard, and fantastic artist. And I knew him too. I'm not bragging, but that's when I was growing up, and I knew him and was friendly with him and saw him as an adult in Munich later in our lives. But the thing was that Herman Fry really was hurt by the fact that although he respected Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, the public, the critics, certain managers basically said, well, here's Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, here's Herman Fry, and then here are all the other German baritones. And there was a definite ranking. It was kind of like, in tennis, let's say that one of them is Nadal, one of them is Djokovic, one of them is, I'm suddenly forgetting, Roger Federer. And what we can say, they're all great. They're all different, they have different followings. But if one of them goes ahead and wins an extra tournament, then suddenly Nadal might be number 1 for now.
Yeah.
But basically,
it's hard to do that in opera. Yeah.
Right. But through their whole careers, it was always, here's the god Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, and here is Herman Fry. And then, he was ranked number 2, and then everybody was below him. But he didn't talk about it too much, but I knew that it hurt him. Because why did he have to go around with that reputation? He actually did a lot more opera than Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. He was a wonderful recitalist. I heard him many, many times in recital, and I learned a lot of what I learned recording wise of the great Schubert cycles and so on was either Herman Fry or the Danish tenor Axel Schütz, who I commend to people if they don't know him.
Yeah.
They really were masters of that music among male singers of that time. Less Mahler, I didn't hear them do much Mahler because they didn't do as much Mahler as we hear now. Now we have other singers doing Mahler. But I'm interested that your 2 singers are considerably from the past, not the ancient past, but one of them the 1950s, the other died in the late 90s. Herman Fry died in 1998. Therefore, when you were growing up and listening to opera performances, was there any singer, it doesn't have to be a baritone, by the way, was there any singer who captured your attention for his or her interpretive skills or the way their voice made you feel, something that really grabbed you? I think most people who love opera have that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Fred, because I didn't get into opera until college. And so I really, at that point, I was already a voice major at Florida State, and I was kind of introduced to it because it was my major, and so the singers I was introduced to were because my teacher's like, well, you need to go back and you need to listen to Robert Merrill, you need to listen to Leonard Warren. But yeah, I'm trying to remember back. I remember hearing Tosca in opera workshop class, and it was Placido Domingo singing Cavaradossi and the jail scene, and hearing E Lucevan le Stelle for the first time, as a complete opera virgin, and just being blown away. And I didn't know whether he was a tenor or baritone at that time. I mean, I was that novice with the whole thing. And I was like, I want to do this. I want to do that,
But that's what I mean, that many singers I know, and actors and painters and so on, some leading creative figure, not necessarily leading, inspires them to say, I want to do that. And I guess that's what I was asking you, because you mentioned that Cheryl Milnes sang a fair amount in Orlando. I once saw him do Don Giovanni in Orlando in the previous company. And so I know that he was a presence when you were growing up, but maybe not quite going yet at the time.
Yeah, my family didn't. They were both educators, my parents, and we didn't really have disposable income. I mean, I think I remember watching Magic Flute on PBS as a kid and not knowing what it was. But yeah, I didn't really go to opera until college, and it was part of my major. I grew up with a lot of music theater. Music theater was kind of my first love. Not that we went to Broadway shows, but you do the High School Musical, and obviously listen to the soundtrack of Ragtime, Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis. But I just kind of fell in love with those things. Yeah,
the classic older Broadway musicals all had leading baritone roles.
Right, like Soliloquy, that was kind of my jam early on from
Carousel.
Yeah,
because it was John Raitt, there was Richard Kiley.
I was going to say John Raitt.
Kiley. Yeah,
John Raitt. Oh my gosh,
did all those roles, and then Richard Kiley took over a lot of the baritone roles, and Brian Stokes Mitchell after that. Yeah, and there are throughout Broadway history, there's the leading man baritone type, as opposed to the tenor type, who's a very
Howard Keel. Howard Keel and Kiss Me Kate.
Being another.
I used to watch that in high school. Yeah, I did his Where's the Life That Late I Led? That was my senior competition
Camelot
piece in high school.
That's Camelot.
From Kiss Me Kate. No, from Kiss Me Kate.
You're right.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I got into music at first, was through Broadway musicals. I had no idea what opera was until college. And the first opera I was in was Der Vampir, this romantic opera by Marschner. Yeah. And I was like, this is like music theater on steroids. Yeah. This is awesome. I could get into
with
this.
Better possibilities for scenery and production values, usually.
Bigger orchestra. Yeah, exactly. And I've been stuck ever since. I've been lucky to be able to cross over and do some music theater. Like I've done Billy Bigelow with Minnesota Orchestra. Did Harold Hill and the Music Man, which is a role I love, with Colorado Symphony. Did Brigadoon. Supposed to be doing Sweeney Todd with Helena Symphony coming up. That'll be my first Sweeney Todd, which I'm really excited about.
I was going to ask you when Sweeney Todd is coming, because that seems natural.
Who is your Mrs.
Lovett? Do you know there are a lot of opera women who are doing wonderful Mrs. Lovetts now. It's kind of like a career role for many women, mezzo sopranos I know in opera, who are having wonderful successes doing Mrs. Lovett.
Yeah, I don't know who the Mrs. Lovett is, but it's it's supposed to be in May, so we still got some time. Yeah.
So I know that you need to go. I have a concluding question. We're talking about opera and musical theater. When I began going to musical theater and heard Ethel Merman and Carol Channing and Barbra Streisand when I was a kid, they never used amplification. They never used microphones. In opera, we don't use that. So if you are in situations where sometimes you're doing opera and sometimes you're doing musical theater, how is it different if you're asked to sing with a microphone when you have, I've been in a room with you, your voice carries without a microphone, to have to adjust your musical performance, your voice production, when you are singing with other people who are mic'd and when you're singing with people who are not mic'd?
It's a great question. There's a lot of nuance to it, but I think it all boils down to if you have a good sound engineer, right? Because aesthetically, if it would look weird for you not to have a mic, if everyone else in the cast has a mic, right? But if you have a good sound engineer, they know how to ride you, and they'll turn you up when you're doing the dialogue. But I remember like the guy in Minnesota, like he would just have me off for most of the singing stuff, so if they have a really good sense of your voice, if they're an artist in their own right, that makes all the difference. So that's my shortcut version of that answer. Okay.
I was working on something that had a group of younger artists, and the great legendary soprano Renata Scotto was well into her 70s. And the production team, this would not have been my choice, decided that everybody had to be mic'd. And Renata Scotto said, I do not do microphone. They take it away. And everyone else was mic'd, and she was not mic'd. And she was more audible because her technique was so fine, fine.
Yeah.
She didn't need the microphone. I sound better without microphone, she said. And it was true.
Yeah, it is true.
Micro amplification, even with great singers and a great sound engineer, can be compressing and flattening. Whereas if you put someone like you with your big, beautiful voice in the right space, you get the colors a lot more. You were talking before about Herman Fry, Leonard Warren, voices with colors.
Yeah.
Your voice, I've heard, we get the colors unamplified in a way that we would not amplified, because they would have to reel you back in to keep you at the same volume level as the other singers.
You have to compress it.
So you're going to have to sing only solo is all I can say.
Well, you're very kind to say such nice words about my voice, but I'll tell you, when we first sang in Steinmetz Hall, because we were in the Disney Theater, which we had to use amplification because it's a Broadway hall. Gosh, what a world of difference. So I really hope people can come and check out the new space with us. The singers just sounded glorious in there. For Rigoletto was the first opera we did. I'm wearing the Viva Verdi shirt right here.
I see it. By the way, the conductor of that, Gregory Buchhalter, will be my guest in a few weeks.
Oh, fabulous. He's great people. We love Greg. Yeah.
Yes. So I know you need to conclude, and I know about opera hours and punctuality. So Gabriel Preisser, thank you. Keep up the good work. Very proud of you to see that you are lifting up opera in your community, which has its own very special set of circumstances that offer a lot of possibilities, but also a lot of challenges. And I know you're up to it.
Thank you, Fred. Really enjoy spending time with you, and great to be involved. And I hope everyone enjoyed our time together. Thank you.
Yes. And do visit Orlando, not just for the theme parks. Eat fresh fruit every day, and also go to the opera.
There you go. See you guys at the opera. See you there.
Okay.
Take care, Fred. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.